When one of the most iconic names in American industry, John Deere, moves its factories to Mexico, it sends shockwaves not only through Wall Street and the White House, but also shakes the very foundation of what "Made in the USA" truly means. Is this a betrayal or a smart strategy in an age of globalization and rising production costs? At Eagle Discovery, we're not here to offer easy answers. We dig into the heart of these shifts to understand what's really reshaping the future of American manufacturing. Today's video offers an objective, in-depth analysis of a topic stirring national debate. This content is non-political and created purely for educational and discussion purposes. John Deere's Mexico Move Strategy over Sentiment. John Deere, long revered as a symbol of American agricultural strength, has stirred controversy by relocating part of its manufacturing to Mexico. For many, the move feels like a betrayal of American workers. But peel back the emotion, and a different picture emerges, one of calculated adaptation in the face of relentless global pressure. This isn't about corporate treason. It's a matter of economic survival. Rising domestic costs and increasingly efficient international competitors leave even legacy brands little room for sentimentality. In the unforgiving arena of global manufacturing, clinging to tradition can mean falling behind. Today, survival belongs not to the nostalgic, but to the nimble. Former President Donald Trump's reaction was as immediate as it was incendiary. He proposed a punitive 200% tariff on Deere products assembled in Mexico. His response, anchored in the nationalist America First framework, appeals to voters mourning industrial decline. Yet this populist backlash misses the broader structural shift at play, a world where competitive advantage is less about patriotism and more about global positioning. Ultimately, this clash reflects a deeper rift between the short-term cycles of electoral politics and the long-haul strategies required by global corporations. Politicians think in terms of re-elections. Businesses think in terms of sustainability, innovation, and international supply chains, and so we're left with a vital question. What really defines an American company in the 21st century? Is it the location of its factories? Or the value it creates, the jobs it sustains, and the innovation it drives across national boundaries? For today's multinational enterprises, national identity is increasingly tied to vision and investment rather than geography. If John Deere continues to fund domestic R&D, employ U.S.-based engineers, and remain a leader in global agricultural innovation, does a cross-border shift really dilute its American essence? Or does it reflect a more resilient and forward-thinking identity? More importantly, the controversy underscores a long-standing vulnerability in U.S. industrial policy. To keep advanced manufacturing at home, the country must offer more than slogans and tariffs. It must provide the tools for global competitiveness. That means strategic investment in cutting-edge automation, digital infrastructure, education reform, and a regulatory environment that fosters innovation rather than punishes flexibility. Tariffs may provide political talking points, but they don't modernize supply chains or spark technological revolutions. The Deere story isn't about betrayal. It's about transformation. Moving some operations to Mexico doesn't mean turning away from American ideals. It means recognizing that leading in a global economy sometimes requires operating beyond borders. This isn't a story of abandonment. It's a challenge. A challenge for the U.S. to redefine industrial leadership, not through protectionism, but through progress. Trump's trade war, nationalism, confronts global reality. The trade war initiated by former President Donald Trump, particularly against China, represented a sharp and deliberate departure from the traditional bipartisan consensus that had supported liberalized trade for decades. Framed as a bold attempt to close America's widening trade deficit and rejuvenate its struggling manufacturing sector, the administration implemented tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, in some cases reaching a staggering 125%. The strategy aimed to exert maximum pressure on Beijing in the belief that China's economy, heavily reliant on exports to the United States, would be forced into making concessions on trade practices, intellectual property, and industrial policy. thereby restoring what the administration saw as lost American leverage on the world stage. Yet the assumptions behind this approach quickly met a more complicated and resistant reality. Rather than folding under pressure, China responded with a calculated counteroffensive of its own, imposing retaliatory tariffs of up to 84% on key American exports. These countermeasures specifically targeted politically sensitive sectors such as agriculture, automobiles, and technology, industries deeply embedded in the heartland of Trump's support base. What ensued was not a quick resolution or negotiated peace, but a prolonged economic confrontation in which both sides dug in, transforming trade from a mutually beneficial exchange into a geopolitical battleground. For American farmers, the consequences were immediate and severe. Once booming exports of soybeans, corn, pork, and dairy products faced steep barriers in China, triggering a ripple effect across rural economies. Major manufacturers, already strained by shifting global dynamics, saw input costs surge as tariffs increased the price of steel, aluminum, and other imported components. Consumer goods became collateral damage, with everything from electronics to washing machines becoming more expensive for average Americans. This was no longer a mere policy disagreement. It had morphed into an economic crossfire with global implications. Financial markets grew jittery as uncertainty became the new normal and investors braced for every new escalation. Beneath the high-profile tariff exchanges, however, loomed a far more subtle but equally destabilizing risk. China's status as the single largest foreign holder of U.S. Treasury bonds gave it quiet but potent leverage. At the height of the trade conflict, speculation intensified around the possibility that Beijing might respond by offloading part of its $1 trillion in U.S. debt holdings, an act sometimes dubbed the economic nuclear option. While such a move would also harm China's own financial stability, the mere threat was enough to rattle bond markets and expose the fragile balance of power in a deeply entangled global financial system. The broader outcome of Trump's trade confrontation was not what its architects envisioned. Instead of forcing China to capitulate, the strategy drove Beijing to accelerate its self-sufficiency agenda. China began rapidly developing its domestic semiconductor industry, expanding partnerships with nations across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, and bolstering its Belt and Road Initiative. It diversified its import sources and reduced its dependency on American suppliers. In effect, the trade war catalyzed a shift toward a more multipolar global economy, one in which the U.S. could no longer count on its dominant position to unilaterally shape outcomes. Meanwhile, in the United States, businesses faced months and even years of operational uncertainty. Supply chains had to be redesigned or rerouted. Investors hesitated to make long-term bets. Prices rose not only due to tariffs, but also due to market volatility, a slowdown in cross-border investment, and broader geopolitical tension. The average American consumer became an unwitting participant in an international power struggle, paying more at checkout counters for products that used to move freely between nations. What this prolonged standoff ultimately revealed was the extent to which economic nationalism, when wielded in a globalized economy, can become a double-edged sword. It exposed the fallacy that a country can easily disentangle itself from international supply chains and financial networks through unilateral measures. In today's tightly interconnected world, national economies no longer function in isolation. They are bound together by trade routes, digital platforms, logistics hubs, and capital flows that defy political borders. Attempting to pull back from that network through confrontation rather than collaboration can generate more harm than gain. The long-term legacy of Trump's trade war may not be a revitalized manufacturing sector as initially promised, but rather a costly reminder of the limits of economic coercion. It showed that reshoring factories is no longer the most accurate measure of economic power. In the modern era, strength is defined by a nation's capacity to innovate, to form flexible alliances, and to maintain credibility in a world where trust, speed, and collaboration are essential. In the end, what Trump's tariff campaign left behind was not a blueprint for dominance, but a case study in unintended consequences. It broke the illusion that the United States could dictate terms through force alone, and it demonstrated that when trade becomes a weapon, Even the world's strongest economies are not immune from the fallout. The pursuit of leverage became a lesson in humility, and the experiment in economic nationalism revealed just how much the global order relies not on isolation, but on interdependence that must be managed, not severed. Trade without borders no more. How a tariff war shook North American alliances. When the Trump administration launched its aggressive trade offensive against China, most observers assumed the battle lines would stay confined to the Pacific. Yet as tensions escalated, it became painfully clear that the fallout was not limited to geopolitical rivals but extended to close allies, especially Canada. The imposition of a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum shocked one of the most tightly integrated trade relationships in the modern world. It wasn't just an economic strike, it was a diplomatic rupture. Striking at decades of military and economic partnership under frameworks like NAFTA, and later the USMCA Canada, wasn't just economically wounded, it was symbolically dismissed, signaling that even friends could become targets of an unpredictable wave of America. First nationalism. Canada's reaction, though careful, was firm. Officials condemned the tariffs as unjustified and offensive, and swiftly enacted countermeasures targeting emblematic American goods, from orange juice to motorcycles to whiskey and maple syrup on the ground. Canadian consumers began shifting toward local or European alternatives. Tourism flows slowed, and cross-border industries like aerospace, automotive, and logistics were forced to rethink their operations. Companies long reliant on seamless trade now faced not just added costs but broken trust and disrupted predictability. The trade war inflicted more than financial damage. It fractured a shared sense of purpose that had defined regional cooperation for decades. Nowhere was the irony more evident than in the case of Ford. A company practically synonymous with American manufacturing tradition found itself squeezed by the very tariffs intended to defend domestic industry, with raw material prices soaring: steel for frames, aluminum for bodies, lithium for batteries. Ford faced an unsustainable equation and opted to shift portions of its electric vehicle production abroad. This decision, though controversial, exposed a hard truth about economic nationalism in practice. When survival is on the line even deeply, American brands must prioritize sustainability over symbolism instead of boosting job creation at home. The tariffs triggered a partial manufacturing exodus, showing that protectionist policies can backfire and deepen structural vulnerabilities rather than fix them. This moment underscores a larger lesson about 21st century economics in a world defined by interwoven supply chains. Strategic alliances are more than diplomatic gestures. They are operational lifelines. Applying tariffs at one end of a regional system sends shockwaves through the entire network, undermining the very efficiency and resilience those systems were built to deliver. The idea that a nation can seal itself off to achieve economic strength is no longer just outdated. It is actively damaging. Economies are no longer self-contained. They are co-producing, co-innovating, and codependent, and in such a context, isolation weakens rather than protects. The once seamless triangle of the United States, Canada, and Mexico, hailed as a model of regional integration, is now constantly oscillating between collaboration and confrontation. The USMCA, which was meant to renew and modernize North American trade, has been tested almost from the start. Its structure remains intact, but the trust it relies on has been significantly eroded. And in trade, trust is often more valuable than tariffs. The true measure of leadership in today's economic climate is not force, but foresight. Real influence comes not from flexing muscle, but from building dependable partnerships and showing strategic clarity. Short-term political gains from tariffs may excite a base, but they do not secure long-term global leadership, especially when they alienate allies and disrupt shared prosperity. Trump's tariff decisions were not just about economic leverage against China. They served as a stress test for the cohesion of North American diplomacy, and the results revealed uncomfortable truths. Canada, a nation bound to the U.S. by geography, culture, and history, became collateral in a broader ideological battle about trade and nationalism. When economic tools are weaponized, even friends can be hit by the blast, and when the dust settles, the damage is not only to trade flows, but to foundational stability itself. This trade war was never only about commodities. It was a referendum on how nations engage in an era that no longer rewards isolation. And the verdict is clear: protectionism in an interconnected age doesn't merely antagonize opponents, it alienates partners, fragments alliances, and weakens the very architecture of global stability that has underpinned decades of progress. Green manufacturing abroad, a contradiction or a catalyst in America's sustainability agenda. John Deere's decision to relocate part of its manufacturing to Mexico has sparked a deeper debate at the intersection of climate ambition, economic reality, and global accountability. At first glance, the optics are unsettling: a cornerstone American brand celebrated for agricultural innovation now shifting operations to a country with looser environmental regulations. For many, this feels like regression, a retreat from the nation's clean energy aspirations. But the truth may be far more nuanced and potentially even optimistic. While it is true that environmental enforcement in Mexico does not match the rigor of the United States, that does not mean John Deere has abandoned its green commitments. Instead, this move raises a more pressing question. Can American corporations uphold world-class sustainability standards even in regions that don't demand them? If John Deere brings its clean technologies, waste reduction systems, and energy-efficient processes to its facilities abroad, then it is not stepping back but stepping into a new role as a pioneer of borderless climate leadership. This could reshape the very idea of globalization, no longer a race to the bottom but a mechanism to elevate environmental norms everywhere. Envision a future where U.S. companies voluntarily apply American-grade environmental standards wherever they operate. This transforms the narrative from greenwashing to green exporting rather than exploiting weaker oversight. They become engines of change, seeding sustainable practices in new markets and influencing local suppliers to raise their game. This would redefine what it means to be an American company in the climate age, shifting sustainability from something geographic to something ethical and transnational, where responsibility is measured not by where a factory stands, but by how it operates and who it inspires. The implications reach far beyond one manufacturer. If this model takes root, it could help rebalance a core tension in global climate policy. Today, the burden of decarbonization often falls on developed nations, while developing economies lack resources to contribute equally. But if firms like John Deere invest in clean production overseas, they are not outsourcing emissions, they are extending solutions, making the transition more just and more effective. In doing so, corporations become not just stakeholders but partners in climate diplomacy. Sustainability no longer flows only from treaties but from commerce, from innovation, and from example American businesses acting as unofficial ambassadors of environmental values, shaping markets through every supply chain decision. Of course, this vision depends on transparency, on audits, on internal safeguards. Without them, symbolic gestures could eclipse real progress. But if implemented with integrity, John Deere's move could serve as a case study for turning globalization into stewardship. This is no longer about where we build it, is about whether American ideals can travel with American industry and redefine global expectations. In an era where climate responsibility is the new currency of legitimacy, the companies that embrace this challenge won't just be adjusting to the future, they will be the ones writing it. Fiscal chaos and MAGA gridlock. America's economic unraveling. The MAGA wing of the Republican Party, once solid in its allegiance to Donald Trump, now finds itself trapped in an identity crisis that has spilled into America's fiscal arena, creating not just a budgeting issue, but a full-blown governance breakdown, while public declarations about slashing government spending remain loud. The actual results tell a different story, with only $4 billion in proposed cuts surfacing against a backdrop of a $2.2 trillion deficit. What's unfolding is less a dispute over math and more a reflection of ideological confusion and strategic gridlock. The movement that once reshaped Republican priorities with populist force now struggles under the weight of its own contradictions, advocating for limited government, but unable to agree on where the limits should fall. Proposals to reduce defense spending entitlements or corporate support have fractured internal unity, exposing a vacuum where a coherent fiscal strategy should be what might seem like legislative delay, is in fact a deeper failure to align vision with action. Outside the marble halls of Congress, the damage deepens. Public faith in political leadership continues to erode. Voters aren't seeing tough compromises or disciplined governance. They're seeing chaos as debates drag on. Investor confidence is faltering. Fears of government shutdowns, legislative gridlock, and missed payment deadlines are no longer distant hypotheticals, but immediate risks shaping market behavior and economic outlooks. The world is watching too. Credit rating agencies are taking notes. Global investors are recalibrating strategies, and the dollar's reputation as a pillar of stability is beginning to look shaky. If Congress cannot manage its fiscal responsibilities, the tremors could ripple across the global economy, pushing interest rates upward and casting doubt on the reliability of American economic leadership. The irony is difficult to ignore. A movement that rose by denouncing elite dysfunction now finds itself embodying that very disorder. Its inability to pass meaningful fiscal reform has created an opening for critics to question not just its ideas, but its competence. Its promise to restore common sense has been buried under political infighting and performative outrage. This is not merely a disagreement over numbers. It's a signal flare from the heart of democracy. A nation can't chart a course through economic storms with leaders fighting over which way is north. Slogans won't balance the budget, and theatrical conflict won't stabilize financial systems. Rebuilding trust in governance requires more than defiance. It demands the discipline to actually govern. What this moment teaches is stark populism without pragmatism doesn't lead to reform. It leads to paralysis. Unless lawmakers set aside factional loyalty and confront fiscal truth with clarity and courage, the consequences will not just be political, but historic. Because sometimes empires don't fall to outside forces, they slowly unravel from within one unresolved budget at a time. Ford and Tesla, redefining the American industrial dream in the digital age. The United States is entering a new era of industry unlike anything seen since the birth of the assembly line. But this time, the transformation is not just technological. It is a deep shift in what it means to be made in America in the 21st century. Leading this movement are two companies with vastly different visions. Ford and Tesla, one built on legacy, the other on disruption. Both are reshaping national pride through clean energy, artificial intelligence, and global speed. Ford's T3 project is more than a product overhaul. It is a complete reinvention of its industrial foundation through automated production, solid-state batteries, electric vehicles built to last 1 million miles, and ultra-fast charging. This isn't a tech refresh. It's a cultural declaration. Ford is saying that staying American means evolving as CEO. Jim Farley said, "This isn't nostalgia. It's survival." Not everyone welcomes this shift. Former President Donald Trump has condemned Ford's electrification and automation as unpatriotic, claiming that decarbonization and robotics will betray American workers. But Ford's response cuts to the core of modern patriotism in a world moving swiftly toward digital and green frontiers. Staying stuck in the past is the true danger. Ford argues that to lead the future, you must build it, not preserve the ruins of yesterday. While Ford modernizes its legacy, Tesla built its empire from scratch without inherited infrastructure or outdated dealership networks. Tesla owns every stage from lithium mining and battery production to vehicle assembly and direct sales. This vertical control gives Tesla unmatched speed, scale, and independence. Tesla doesn't just make cars. It controls the entire process, and that has become its competitive superpower. Ford and Tesla may follow different paths, but they move toward the same destination, a smarter, cleaner, more agile version of American industry. Whether progress is born from reinvention or reinvention from scratch, Both show that the future of Made in America is not about assembly lines, but about systems thinking, clean technology, and global competitiveness. This transformation forces the country to reconsider what it means to be patriotic. When algorithms run factories and cars run on electricity, can American industry embrace robots and still uplift workers? Can it be both green and red, white and blue? These are not just economic questions, they are cultural ones. They challenge the nation's sense of identity. At the heart of it all, the stories of Ford and Tesla are about vision, resilience, and the will to define what comes next. Tradition offers roots, but it is innovation that yields growth. The road ahead will be bumpy politically and technologically, but one thing is certain: the next frontier of American industry will not be conquered by looking in the rearview mirror. It will be led by those bold enough to accelerate into the unknown. North America's post-globalization industrial shift, the quiet rise of NAFTA. 20. The recent trend of U.S. giants like John Deere and Ford shifting production to Mexico is not just a matter of trimming costs. It is an early signal of a broader transformation quietly remapping the industrial future of North America. Under the framework of the USMCA, we are witnessing the emergence of a new, tightly knit regional network, a structure some are calling NAFTA 20. This is more than a branding refresh. It is a fundamental redesign of how the US, Mexico, and Canada engage with one another economically in a world where traditional globalization is under strain. With trade tensions, supply chain breakdowns, and rising geopolitical risks, companies are embracing nearshoring, a strategy that brings production closer to demand, tightens loops, and relies on regional trust rather than distant dependence. What's forming is a three-part ecosystem: Mexico, taking the lead in large-scale assembly and manufacturing, powered by affordable labor and growing infrastructure; the United States anchoring the network through research, development, financing, and high-tech innovation; and Canada building strength in precision production, green technologies, and engineering-intensive sectors. This new division of roles isn't just efficient, it's protective. It builds resilience against disruptions that used to seem rare, but now arrive like clockwork: chip shortages, shipping delays, geopolitical flare-ups, tariff swings. By concentrating processes within North America, companies are creating an industrial firewall, one built not just on logistics, but on political alignment and regulatory harmony. But there's a bigger story here, a rare opportunity to turn industrial policy from a race for profit into a path to regional revival. If deployed wisely, NAFTA 20 could ignite a manufacturing renaissance, not by closing borders, but by redesigning globalization to be more controlled. Cooperative and sustainable companies would stop chasing the lowest bidder overseas and start building with trusted partners nearby, replacing fragile just-in-time systems with adaptive just-in-case strategies. This new structure lays the foundation for a shared continental identity, one that unites American creativity, Mexican capability, and Canadian precision into a competitive force that rivals the old global model, which often favored cost over resilience and scale over sovereignty. Of course, this outcome is not guaranteed. It depends on coordination, clear regulations, smart investments, and strong workforce development. Without synchronized effort, this vision could stumble under misalignment or political division, but with collaboration, the rewards could be transformative. In a world losing faith in hyper-globalization, regionalization is not retreat, it is evolution. It is about rooting prosperity in closeness, shielding supply chains from chaos, and proving that an economically bonded continent can be greater than the sum of its parts. What we are witnessing is not a post-NAFTA correction. It is a new blueprint for how regions, not just nations, can thrive in the fractured and fast-moving economy of the 21st century. In a world that's more connected and competitive than ever, it's natural for companies like John Deere and Ford to rethink their strategies to stay ahead. But adapting to change shouldn't mean abandoning core values or social responsibility. To support a truly sustainable future, the government must go beyond tariffs by investing in infrastructure, education, and innovation. Only through strong collaboration between public policy and private industry can the U.S. lead the next industrial era with purpose and resilience. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We value every perspective. See you in the next video.